Hello, everybody. I'm Randy Credico. Randy Credico live on the fly here on the Progressive Radio Network. Got a big show and got to get right to it. It's John Brown today, anniversary of the raid on Harper's Ferry. Actually, today, the 18th, is when it came to an end. So we're going to talk to Margaret Kimberly of the Black Agenda Report, the co-founder and now the co-executive editor, in just 1 minute. The show coming up this week at Theater 80 St. Mark's is totally sold out, but it will be live streamed. We'll talk about that later. And that's about it. We're going to go right to it. We got some music by Paul Robeson to kick it off and throughout the show. And we'll be right back on the other side.
Praise to Joy, the God-descended daughter of Elysium, ray of mirth and rapture blended, goddess, to thy shrine we come. By thy magic is united what stern custom parted wide. All mankind are brothers plighted, where thy gentle wings above.
I'm Randy Credico live on the fly here in New York City. Actually, not New York City, I'm in Washington, D.C. I spent yesterday at Harper's Ferry. Today is the anniversary of the ending of Harper's Ferry, the raid on Harper's Ferry by John Brown, some of his kids, and 6 or 7 others. I think that's a starting point. I have such a great guest here, Margaret Kimberly, who knows a lot about John Brown. Margaret Kimberly is the co-founder and now the co-editor of my favorite, or the top 2 or 3 in the world. I guess you would call it alternative radio, television, and just media outlets, and that's Black Agenda Report. Margaret Kimberly, you got this book out. Here it is. It's called Presidential. I just read a quote by Cornel West, who gave you a big plug. Yes, let me just say hello to you before I really overgo with this introduction. Margaret Kimberly. Also, she's involved in this book here, which is In Defense of Assange. You got a great essay in there. And
thank you.
We're going into this week, our next Stand Up for Assange event. You'll be there. And I think that's why we're sold out. You people out there, don't come because you have to watch it on live stream. Thank you, Margaret Kimberly, for being part of this.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And I always want to say thank you to Dr. Cornel West for, I know he's asked for blurbs all the time, so I feel especially honored that he did that for me. It's a big thing in publishing. So, yeah. But as always, he is a man of the people, and I don't mean that in the trite way that it sounds.
Well, let me just read what he says. Margaret Kimberly gives us an intellectual gem of prophetic fire about all the U.S. presidents and their deep-rooted, the vicious legacy of white supremacy and predatory capitalism. Such truth seems more than most Americans can bear, though we ignore her word at our own peril. That's a pretty nice quote there.
It is. I love it. It's that's what I try to live up to. At Black Agenda Report, that's our ethos. And the late Glenn Ford, who was the driving force behind Black Agenda Report, that was something he always strived to do. We strive to be truth tellers. And that's not always easy to do. We are, talking around the Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day. I think Indigenous people need their own day, not connected to him, but all these things are tied together. The way that history is taught and reported, the holidays, the Columbus's name on everything from Columbia, that the Americas are called Columbia after the Genocide. I mean, there's an awful lot of decolonizing you'd have to do to really do that. But yes, that's what I try to live up to.
Well, you got this. Wasn't there a Columbia space capsule? Or
Yes, there was. Yes,
Col-
capital, District of Columbia, nation Columbia, Columbus. So I mean, I could go on and on.
Well, I can go. I was in Central Park. I was talking about this with you earlier. Columbus Central Park, and of course, there's a big statue of Columbus right out there in front, at Columbus Circle, and then you go into the middle of it, which I have not been in many years. In my 40 years, I saw something I couldn't believe in the 40 years, and that is a statue. Maybe I saw it, but it didn't ring a bell why I should be upset about it, but of Daniel Webster. Of Daniel Webster, we've had this movement to tear down statues around the country, particularly those connected to the South and the Civil War, Jackson and Lee and Longstreet and whoever, and then Jefferson Davis. And I see this one, he's just as bad as those guys in my eye. Because he was responsible for the fugitive slave law along with Henry Clay, and he enforced the law under Pierce. Now, what's your opinion about Daniel Webster? Should we have that in the center of Central Park?
90% of the monuments and statues we have need to be taken down. We have this false history of benevolence, of American exceptionalism, that these people who we're told were great and noble in some way, most of them did really horrible things. And I think most of them can come down. There are people whose statues, you mentioned John Brown. We should have a statue of John Brown. Is there a statue of John Brown in New York City anywhere?
No.
I don't think so. Excuse me. And he lived upstate in near Lake Placid, I believe.
Yeah, North Elba.
Yeah, and he is responsible. He hastened the start of the Civil War, which is a good thing. It was the only way for slavery to have ended was through warfare. And so we have statues to, the founding fathers, the, slave holders and killers of indigenous people and people who were prominent, became prominent because of wrongdoing. Actually, that's still true, isn't it? So to become president of the United States or to have crafted some landmark legislation, it usually means the person did something that was very harmful to many people. So if it were up to me, 90% of the statues would come down.
Yeah, I think there's one of William Seward that I support, and there's one up in Rochester of the Jerry Rescue. William Herman, who was the one of the first that challenged the Jerry Rescue. There's one of him in the middle of Syracuse. And there are some around the state that I would support, but it's very difficult for me to find statues that I think should be there and paid for with public funds.
Yeah, well, most of them are, they're from these people who we're told are great, but great in some horrible way. So I think part of the problem is people they become in the background, and people walk by a statue every day. They don't even know who's, they may look at it and see who it is. The Seward statue, I'm trying to think where it is. I know it's someplace in Manhattan. But most of them are, blend into the background. And if you tell people who they are, they maybe don't know who it is. But if we're going to honor people, the other thing is all these statues are of people who lived, 150, 200, 300 years ago. We need to memorialize people who have more relevance for modern times. And, when you remember people who were politicians right away, you're talking about people who 9 times out of 10 should not be remembered. Can we remember great artists? Can we remember activists? Can we remember other people who brought beauty, who brought truth to us instead of these, these old dudes who've been dead a long time, who were very dubious even when they were around?
Well, is there a statue of Frederick Douglass in Manhattan? Is there a statue of Maria Lydia Child is there.
There is a Frederick Douglass statue at 110th Street, where Central Park West becomes Frederick Douglass Boulevard. I don't happen to like the particular statue. It's too small. It's in the middle of a traffic circle. So if you're driving, you don't know who it is. If you notice a statue at all, I don't think it's big enough. But now the critic in me comes out. But yes, there is.
What about Du Bois? Is there a statue of Du Bois anywhere in the state of New York?
I'm not aware of one. If there is one, I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, well, he's in an epigraph of your preface to your book here. And, this is in 1956. I shall not go to the polls. I have not registered. I believe that democracy has so far disappeared in the United States that no two evils exist. There is but one evil party with two names, and it will be elected despite all I can do. So that's the great Du Bois. And there should be a statue. Are you a student of Du Bois? Du Bois have
somewhat. I can't speak with him in great detail, but he is one of our great scholars. And it's interesting, when he wrote those words in 1956, and he went, during his many decades of scholarship, he went back and forth over the issue of electoral politics. So he was among those who advocated endorsing Woodrow Wilson, which he and every other Black person came to regret. He was an arch segregationist, horrible man. But then he would say, we have, and at that time, most Black people were Republicans, because the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, the Democrats were the party of the segregated South. But anyway, he went back and forth over this issue of supporting certain people. And at the end of his life, he'd become a Marxist. I believe in 1956, I don't believe he'd left for Ghana just yet, but he was like Paul Robeson. They took his passport, tried to prevent him from traveling. So his history is, it's that of many people, giving the electoral process a chance and then finally just denouncing it all together. And what he said in 1956 resonates today. Black people are trapped in this duopoly of trying to decide who will do us less harm. Is it going to be there's sometimes the Black People's Party was the Republicans, it's been the Democrats for the past 50 years. So now we're in this situation with Biden. People wanted to get rid of Trump so badly, but Biden is horrible.
Yeah.
And this idea that that's all we can do is choose between these alleged lesser evils, which generally amounts to people being, the Democrats now, as the late Glenn Ford said, are just the more effective evil. So what he said in 1956 is something that is still true today.
But, he did write a second autobiography, I think, right about that time. He went around Eastern Europe and went to the Soviet Union.
Visited China, visited the Soviet Union. Yeah, he did.
Amazing energy. And he also wrote a book on John Brown. He wrote a biography on John Brown, which I think is probably one, if not the best. He said that in there that Brown really understood the soul of Black men, or of African American. I forgot the quote, but he actually, Black souls, that's what he said, understood whatever he said, but he said it. And I talked about this before with Cornel West, and we, at the same time, I actually had it in front of me. I don't right now. But Du Bois really admired John Brown. What is your thoughts about John Brown looking back on this day when he was captured?
Well, when I'm thinking on these days, I always think about what I was taught when I was a kid. And if John Brown was mentioned at all, you were taught what caused the Civil War, and they'd say John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, without telling you what it was, that he wanted to raise an army of enslaved people. He was hoping to capture the federal arsenal and raise an army of enslaved people to attack the South. it did, for a variety of reasons, did not work out. They were captured, and he and others were executed. Some were killed. Just a few managed to escape. But it was a great deed that should be remembered. The other thing you're always told about John Brown was that he was insane. He was crazy. He was crazy. I mean, it was an audacious act. It was, maybe not logical that he thought he could pull it off. Frederick Douglass advised him against it, told him it was probably going to fail. But he was not insane. He was dedicated from the time he was a kid. His father was very a staunch abolitionist, and he was raised to oppose slavery. So from the time, I believe he was born in Connecticut.
Right.
What's that?
I think so, in 1800.
Yes, and then he lived in Ohio. He lived in upstate New York, but wherever he was, he went to Kansas, and wherever he was dedicated to ending slavery.
Yeah.
And his act hastened the beginning of the Civil War. And I think that's a very important thing. But all of those things that I've just said are never any of the things we're told about him. There's another good biography of Brown. Was it Robert Caro who wrote it? I think.
Yes.
Can't remember.
I believe so, because Cornell brought up that one, I believe.
Yeah, it's also very good. So we have to remember, I remember at the time he was executed, I believe the day of his execution, he said something along the lines of, if I had acted in this way to preserve slavery, everyone would have said that I was good. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the quote in front of me. But
I do, but I'm not going to tell you.
Okay. So this is why it's these are the things people should be taught about him. He should be in the pantheon of great men, the people we're told are great and change this country for the better. But he is an afterthought if he's mentioned at all. He was a crazy man. He killed Confederates. Well, that's what happens in wars, right? So it's like, okay.
Yes.
But and that brings us back to my book and the reason for writing it. Our history, the way we're taught history, is so terrible. Thank you. I'll hold it up myself. I always do this. Does that? Oh, it's blurred.
All right, there it is.
Anyway, I'm trying to blur so people can't see my horrible looking apart.
Okay. That comes into.
I'm hoisted on my own petard. Here we go.
There you go.
Okay, so about how we are taught history, which is half-truths, lies of outright lies of omission, because most scholars want to uphold the system. And so they don't tell us the truth, because if they did, you couldn't defend the system with the truth. You can't say that how brilliant Thomas Jefferson was and leave out the fact that he owned 200 people. You can't talk about George and Martha Washington. One enslaved person managed to escape, and they, for years, tried to catch her. One person, they tried to get her back.
Like Les Miserables. Like Les Miserables, trying to get the one guy that
yes. And or the fact that our nation's capital, why did they build a new city along the Potomac? There were already cities. The first capital was New York, where Washington was inaugurated, and it kept moving further south. And then it was Philadelphia. That was problematic because this slaveholder couldn't keep people in a state which gave freedom to anyone who was there. Any enslaved person who was in Pennsylvania for 6 months could be free. So the Washingtons could not keep anybody in that state for that time. So they rotated people between Mount Vernon and Philadelphia. So how can you be president in a place if you're a slaveholder? So you have to have the capital somewhere else. So you build a new city between Maryland and Virginia on a swamp. But nobody tells you why they had to build a new city. That's something you have to figure out for yourself or know who to go to get that information. So,
well, Jefferson, by the way, let me just throw this in. Jefferson was a big advocate, proponent of building that, and he was going to pull out, I think, the state of Virginia if they didn't bring the capital closer to Virginia.
Sure, absolutely. And why would he do that? Well, it benefited him. He was in Virginia. He was a Virginia slaveholder, and they needed the capital to be in a place where it was physically protected. And now there was, I hasten to add, there was slavery in the northern states at that time, but it was the Virginia and Maryland and other southern states that depended upon slavery more, and where these great men were from, and they had to locate it in a place where it would be protected.
New York didn't end slavery until 1827. John Jay gradually put it in 1800, a bill, Governor Jay, where it would happen 27 years later. So
and he was a slaveholder himself. So that's why he would want to do that. He's another one. So we have John Jay College, John Jay this, John Jay that. And he belonged to an abolitionist society. So to make sure, obviously, that slavery wasn't really abolished, that it was gradual, that you could say if you were a certain age on a certain date, you could be free, but not if you were under that age or over that age, something to circumscribe the process.
Yeah, a lot of fine print in that piece of legislation.
Yeah.
Slavery was abolished in most northern states, except New York, not until 1827. Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Rhode Island, there was no slavery. But New York, here it is.
Yeah. Sojourner, I don't know how many people know, Sojourner Truth was enslaved in New York State. She grew up in the Hudson Valley.
Yes, I got to tell you something. Speaking of a statue, there is a big monument outside of, because Kingston used to be the capital of New York, and there in front of the old Kingston Courthouse there. This is from the 1820s, 1830s. There's some kind of monument, small one, but with words inscribed on there about Sojourner Truth. And she went to a judge there to make sure her son was freed, and he was actually freed, even though she had been free, but the son had not been free. And there's a landmark case in Kingston, New York, way back in the 1820s.
I did not know it was Kingston. Yes, I know about that. She had many children. They were all sold away. She had this one child who was not yet sold away from her. And she went to court and got his freedom, which was possible in some circumstances. But those are the things that people should know. See, I didn't know it was in Kingston, New York. I didn't know Kingston was once the capital.
I did not know, because I'm up here like 35 miles away, and I go to Kingston. That's like the big city here. It's like I'm living the life of Green Acres up here in the Catskills. And I go to the big city, Kingston, and I'm walking around old Kingston, where the only place in the country that has four corners of colonial buildings, four corners there, right in the middle of old Kingston. And there's the old courthouse there, and that's where she won her case. And I forgot who the lawyer was who took it, but it's a very famous case. So ever come up to Kingston, I'll show you to that place.
Sure. I've only gone there on my way to Albany on the Amtrak, so I never got off the train. So maybe I'll have a reason.
All right. Well, that's a place to go. We're talking with Margaret Kimberly, who will be performing, or she'll be speaking, Stand Up for Assange on October 24th at the historic Theater 80 St. Mark's. Her and the other Margaret Ratner Kunstler, who said, I need another speaker. She said, Margaret Kimberly. I said, why didn't I think of that? So I'm glad you're going to be there. I know you're not going to be doing comedy, but you're going to talk about this other book, or at least what you talked about in this other book on Julian Assange. By the way, folks, that show is completely sold out. We'll give you a link before sometime early next week where you can watch it on live stream. I want to talk about Julian Assange, but I think we're going to have to take a break here in a couple of minutes and come back. Getting back to Jefferson, because I want to go back and forth on this book that you wrote, The Prejudicial. What a great name. And the first chapter, or the first the first segment or whatever you want to call it, I guess is a chapter. You got Washington up until James Monroe. And I'm thinking Monroe and Jefferson are in there. And both of them, I read a book recently for the second time. It's called Gabriel's Trumpet. It's Gabriel Prosser, and 1800 abandoned, jettisoned slave revolt in Virginia, in Richmond, which because of the weather, because it rained, he had planned it for a long time. There was a guy in jail there who was under the Alien and Sedition Act, a French guy by the name of Caledon, I think, who actually wrote about how bad the weather was, the worst weather. A rainstorm, it was torrential, so the thing was called off. But somebody who was a house slave ratted them out, and I think about 50, 60 conspirators, most of them were hanged right there in Richmond. And guess who signed the death warrants? James Monroe, who was the governor.
Aha, I did not know
James
that.
Monroe, and he would have these conversations with Jefferson at the time, who was vice president, running for president that year. And a lot of them were inspired by, Jefferson and Monroe and talking about freedom and the First Amendment, and they were going against the Federalist Society. Ironically, Jefferson signed off on it, and he finally said, we better put an end to this before we end up on the gibbet. That's actually what he wrote Monroe. So there were people that were hanged right there in Richmond, downtown, in front of all of these homes. And the women complained after a while, saying, can you move it down towards the river? Because this is upsetting us. And
well, there is, and I know a woman in Richmond, they are working to preserve some of those areas where Gabriel's revolt. There is a lovely plaque in Richmond, very good plaque commemorating him, he and his wife. Now, some people just refer to him as Gabriel. Prosser was the slaveholder's name, and it's not clear if he took his name or not, but Gabriel and Nancy. So there's a lovely commemorative plaque there in Richmond, and an effort to preserve the site of, there was a jail where people were kept who, in the process of being sold, and that there's a very good effort to preserve those sites, to to remove from Richmond, which was the capital of the Confederacy, to remove the monuments to all the Confederates. So there's a lot of effort there to tell this part of the story.
Yes, and there are trial transcripts because everybody went to trial. And they had one lawyer, a public defender type by the name of Foy, I think that was his name, a 4-letter word. And he never asked any questions at all, never asked. And he got like $5 for each conviction. He was the defense attorney. All right, we're going to take a quick break and come right back with Margaret Kimberly after this by Paul Robeson.
Just going home, quiet like some still day. I'm just going home. It's not far, just close by, through an open door. Work all done, carried by, going to fear no more. Mother's there expecting me, father's waiting too. Lots of folks gathered there, all the friends I know.
Okay. That was Paul Robeson, Ode to Joy, which I believe was written by Schiller, the lyrics. I'm Randy Critical, live on the fly, and we are talking with Margaret Kimberly, who is the co-founder of the great Black Agenda Report. Now, let me ask you, and now the senior editor, I guess the late Glenn Ford was the co-editor with you at that point.
He was executive editor, which is now my title, although I'm not fully filling those big shoes. So yes, executive editor.
Let's talk about, before we continue, we may as well talk about Glenn Ford here.
Sure.
I had him on one of the shows last year on Assange Countdown to Freedom. I think it was back in February when he spoke at City College along with Renata Avila and Max Blumenthal and a few others. And he was really forceful. And tell us about Glenn. Glenn was very passionate in everything that he did. He was very committed. Am I right?
He was a revolutionary, and I don't use that word lightly. He didn't use the word lightly, but Glenn was a lifelong socialist. He had an interesting life. He spent part of his childhood in New Jersey and part in Georgia, Columbus, Georgia. So he had this political upbringing, and he had the experience of spending some of his formative years in the segregated South. He was a veteran, a Vietnam era veteran, and then worked in media. He once worked for James Brown, and then he worked for the Mutual Black Network. He was the White House correspondent. And he founded Black Commentator, which is where I first met him. And we eventually decided to have our own publication, Black Agenda Report. We started in 2006. And he had this mixture of being a leftist, being a socialist, and being a nationalist. His primary concern was always the state of Black people. Everything he talked about, how does this impact Black people? He put Black people at the center of his thought. He was an internationalist, of course, dedicated to opposing imperialism. And he was a person who never equivocated in his politics. We say that Black Agenda Report was analysis from a Black left perspective, and he meant Black and he meant left, not Democrat, left.
Right.
So he often wrote about the Black and the late Bruce Dixon also, the Black misleadership class, the Congressional Black Caucus, and other prominent. And I think this applies to Black people who become prominent. How do you become prominent? By basically going along with the system. So we have all these Black members of Congress, but I remember our very first issue in 2006. It was around the time the Democrats were poised to regain control of the House. And he wrote an article, Let the Black Caucus Be Black. And it showed Nancy Pelosi pulling strings of Charlie Rangel and John Conyers, who were then still, after many decades, still in Congress, because everyone had these hopes of, well, if the Democrats have the majority, then Conyers will chair the Judiciary Committee and Rangel will chair the Ways and Means Committee. But what does that mean if you have to do what Nancy Pelosi, the epitome of the corporate neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party, what does that mean if you have to do what she tells you to do? So that was our very first issue of Black Agenda Report. And he pulled no punches. He was true to his politics. And, it's one of the things that I think everybody should remember about Glenn. He would write about things nobody else was writing about. Nobody told you what was happening in Congo. You might read that there were many people killed or there were a lot of sexual assaults, but he would tell you what happened there. He would tell you that Uganda is a US proxy and invaded the country and did it for the mineral wealth. He would tell you about Eritrea, this lone socialist country in the Horn of Africa, which is singled out because it insists on being what its people want it to be. AFRICOM, the US Africa Command, from the moment it was founded, he's the one who wrote about this US effort to control Africa through its militaries. And now there are only a couple of countries that are not part of AFRICOM. So anybody who read Black or who still reads Black Agenda Report will learn things that you don't see anyplace else. And that's something he was very proud of, and I and others are as well.
Well, tell us, how do people read a Black Agenda Report? Give us
blackagendareport.com. Every Wednesday, a new issue. We took a very short break after Glenn passed in July. So we have a new editorial team. There's some new things we want to do some things differently, but every week we present news from a Black left perspective.
And can we expect Black Agenda Radio to be?
Yes, it's coming back. It's coming back. So we have some things to figure out. We don't want to rush just to have it, just to have it. But yes, it will be back.
Yeah, I mean, you lost two big heavyweights here.
Yeah,
Ruth Dixon and Glenn Ford. But the stuff is good. Folks, go to Black Agenda Report and get an education. You can get a lot of the previous archived stuff on Black Agenda Report. Some of the things you were just talking about, right? Is that all archived there?
Sure, it's all there. We have one of the things we have to work on is our web hosting, so you can search more easily. But you can also, by the way, of course, on social media, we're on Twitter, we have a Facebook page, and we have a YouTube program, Danny Haifong and I. Danny does sometimes the two of us together. Black Agenda Report presents The Left Lens on YouTube. And tomorrow night, Tuesday, well, actually, it's not going to be when people see this, sorry, but be on the lookout for The Left Lens, our latest guest. We're going to be talking about AFRICOM. This is the month to have activist efforts to end U.S. involvement in AFRICOM. So our guest is going to be Abayomi Azikiwe from Pan-African Newswire, and we are going to talk about this effort, which is spearheaded by Black Alliance for Peace, which I'm involved in, and
Yes.
other contributors like Ajamu Baraka are also. He's also a bar and a BAP person.
Right. That's part of your resume. I didn't get that far into it because you're also the United Nations Anti-War Coalition.
UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition, yep. And Black Alliance for Peace, and a couple other hats. I'm also, I'm blanking on things, sorry. So I won't try to remember.
It's okay, but you stay active. You're like Glenn. Glenn stayed active, and of course, Bill Kunstler was kind of like my godfather. He was active to the very end. I mean, he just never stopped. He died at 76. And I got to tell you something, he never stopped. He kept moving. He was in that office, down there in that office. He was working on Malcolm X's daughter's the fraudulent claims that she was going after Louis Farrakhan. And that was one of his last cases.
Okay.
So there was some FBI informant that tried to trick her.
I remember that. I remember it was horrible. It was very sad. I was glad that he succeeded in exonerating her.
He was now he's one. I always called him John Brown with a law degree. Bill Kunstler. You know, I would go anywhere with Bill Kunstler because I met him in '86, and I used to drive him around everywhere. I stayed in the house. I would drive him. I'd go to let's say I go to some trial out in Jersey, Newark, not Newark, but wherever the federal courthouse is. And I got to tell you something. Every black kid that was on trial that day would come running up to Bill. They loved. There was a lot of like these young kids out there that died into the criminal. They knew Bill, you know, and of course Cornel West loved him. And you know, he and I did things up at Cayman Baptist Church for the Attica brothers, and wherever he went, Bill was you know, really a race man, I would say, if that term can be used anymore. But Bill was right there, and there was nobody. I don't think there's ever been anyone like him before, before or since. But there are people who try to emulate him. What is your assessment of Bill Kunstler?
I mean, what is there to add? I grew up, you know, it's a funny thing. Because I grew up hearing about him first when I was a kid. So He was around a long time, and he's another one who was a revolutionary, who saved people's lives, who put the system on trial when, as he defended many people, because the law is not neutral. We're taught that it's some perfect thing, but the law can be very unjust, especially for people who are politically active, for all Black people, especially for poor Black people. We are, I think, 14 or 15% of the population, but half the people incarcerated in the country. And so when I always say this, when we talk about human rights, and the United States points fingers at other countries. Well, 2 million people in jail, half of them are Black. I think a quarter of the incarcerated people on earth are Black Americans. I mean, that the mass incarceration is that bad, that stark. So the law allows a lot of horrible things. The law promotes terrible things. And law enforcement, despite its legality, works to ensure that the system of enslavement that we were talking about, the police are the modern day slave patrol, and the police exist to keep Black people under physical control. So all these laws need people like Bill Kunstler, the late Bill Kunstler, to defend and uphold justice, because the law is often not just.
Right. He said that there's no justice in or out of court, and that the courts are there, judges are there to put Black people in prison, and the appellate courts are there to keep them in prison. Basically, that was what Bill Kunstler said. Yes, the criminal justice system we talk about, and the focus has always been on law enforcement. Whether it be in Ferguson, Minneapolis, New York City, but no one ever talks about. They're the Lieutenant Callies. I look at them as the Lieutenant Callies. No one ever looks at the prosecutors and the judges, and of course the politicians. They are just as responsible, if not worse.
Sure. I remember the book. You're reminding me of the book written by the late Judge Bruce Wright, Black Robes, White Justice. Black Robes, White Justice. Was that it? Am I getting the title right? It's a great book. And even if I'm messing up the title, and he made clear, and they gave him this nickname, Let Him Loose Bruce, because he applied the law. The purpose of bail is to ensure appearance in courts. And most people are going to show up for court, so there's no reason for people to have to post bail. But he was pilloried and condemned for following the law. And so that's what we are always fighting against: the judges, the prosecutors. When you read these stories about usually a Black man in jail for 20 years, for 30 years, and then suddenly he's let out, and nobody talks about the prosecutorial misconduct that leads people to be in jail for such long periods of time. I believe most people in jail could be let out and we could all be safe. That's my personal feeling.
Well, mine too. By the way, I don't even know why prisons are the only response. We can really get into this sociologically, but prisons are the only response to ills of society. And why?
Oh, prisons are for Black people. I wrote an article about how the country changed after Martin Luther King was assassinated, and I came across this statistic, and I believe in 1968 there were only 600,000 people incarcerated in the whole country.
Right.
And so it's almost quadrupled the number of people incarcerated, and that was a direct response to the movement, to the liberation movement. If you're not going to have segregation, if segregation is now illegal, there's got to be a new way to keep Black people under control. So then you have the wars on drugs and the 3 strikes you're out, and all of these laws. I talk about unjust laws that put so many people in jail.
Well, in New York State, when Attica uprising occurred, September 9th, 1971, there was like about 12,000, 15,000 people in jail in the state of New York. Now, I mean, it got all the way up to 70,000. It may be have been pared down to about 50 now. But that's still fourfold.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
vast majority are African Americans. I don't see anybody talking about that running for governor. I don't hear Hochul. I don't hear even Jumaane Williams, who I thought, is a cut
Well,
above the others. Now, I mean, it's no surprise to you, and it certainly wouldn't be a surprise to Glenn Ford that Jumaane Williams is not out there saying, we got to start emptying these prisons. And
well, these policies, you can't, this is something you can't get from the electoral process. When you were talking about politicians, I remember Mario Cuomo was responsible for this huge increase in the number of prisons.
37.
He used money for federal money that was supposed to be used for housing. I mean, I guess it was a kind of housing. That was his rationale, I suppose. As badly as low-income people needed housing, it was all went to build prisons. And he would run for governor again. I think it was 3 times he was governor, and always say, I build more prisons. And that was a popular thing for him to say. And so I don't think we can ignore the degree to which people are made to be fearful of crime, of Black people. So it's generally an electoral winner to talk about putting people in jail, and that's racial as well. I remember in the worst days of stop and frisk in New York City, every poll showed that white people thought stop and frisk was just fine, right, which showed you it wasn't for them. It was not meant for them.
Or their kids. Or their kids.
Yeah, exactly. So when people run for office and they have to raise money, they become, however left or radical they used to be, they become less and less, however progressive they're supposed to be. I tend to think we don't have many progressives holding office. And this is
AOC. What about AOC? What is
your? Oh, Jesus, do we have to?
Let's get right to the crux of this. AOC, yes. What is your? I'm sure we have parallel opinions of AOC.
Oh God, what a waste! It's just that was just my gut reaction. When she first came on the scene, she defeated an incumbent, and which is no small thing, and from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, a very young person, still in her 20s. So it's an exciting story. But you see what they do when they get to Congress. Unless these people are revolutionaries, they are not going to change anything because the Democratic Party won't let them. And the purpose of Nancy Pelosi and other people in Democratic Party leadership is to make sure that progressives don't get anything progressive done. And that's all Nancy Pelosi does, is raise money and beat progressives down and make sure they're seen and not heard. And they, of course, go along with it. I remember a couple of months ago, they all were rounded up, and Pramila Jayapal said, oh, I give Biden an A, and AOC said, oh, he exceeded expectations. So they all go along. None of them are fighters. You would really have to be a revolutionary to fight against this system, which is set up to make sure they don't get anything done. So they are all poseurs. The squad and the progressives, and they all say things like, I don't take PAC money. Well, if you vote the same way that everybody else does, so what? What difference does it make? If you're from the DSA or whatever title you give yourself. AOC is even more disappointing because she doesn't even have any savvy. That, stupidity with the Met Gala and thinking if she put tax the rich on the dress, it would, somehow people could somehow overlook that she was there in the first place. And the fact that she and others are always telling us what we can't have. They join with the neoliberals in the Democratic Party and telling us what we can't have. And then you think you can get away with going, you can't be the progressive icon and go to the Met Gala. You can't, you just can't do it. And she thought she could get away with it. But I think that speaks to, frankly, the shallowness. And we can't be fooled because right wingers hate her and hate other people who call themselves progressives. So what? I don't care if they talk about her on Fox News. I don't care if she's a, right-wing fundraising talking point. She doesn't do anything for me. So that's no reason for the rest of us to go along with this charade.
Right. Supporting or being opposed to Manchin doesn't mean that you should support the Iron Dome. And I think she does, as does Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
So getting back her and also James Clyburn, I'm going to talk about him because
Sure.
I talk about him a lot because he's part of that
Absolutely.
Democratic to the right. And I don't know about Hakeem Jeffries. He's not radical enough. I guess he's the best of the New York State legislators. I don't know.
He raises a lot of money, which tells you where he is. Very, very corporate.
Well, why doesn't and this is this week, this Sunday, and we only have by this time has gone by so quickly.
Oh my goodness!
I didn't even get to talk about James Buchanan or Teddy Roosevelt. We're going to have to do
I'll come back.
There's a lot. Calvin Coolidge or Wilson we talked about a little bit, but this week you're going to be there, and AOC wouldn't be there. AOC is lukewarm on Assange, and what is the cause of that? When Assange, what he's done, what he exposed, are crimes against largely people of color, people. Poor people around the world, oppressed people around the world, the crimes in Iraq, the crimes in Afghanistan, the crimes in Honduras. Why wouldn't she be there for that?
Well, you remember when she first won that primary and her peace positions mysteriously disappeared from her website? Do you remember that?
Yes, I think so. You reminded me of it. Yes.
And so I'm not at all surprised she backtracked on the little bit she did say when she was asked about the U.S. effort to overthrow the Venezuelan government. She said, well, I have to see what leadership says. She didn't even pretend. So you can't, she would have to make a break that apparently she's not willing to make in order to stand up the way Assange has done. And the reason, the other reason they imprisoned Assange and have silenced him and have demonized him is to keep anybody else from speaking about the things that he revealed. So even if you're not talking about jail, it's pretty clear that if you stand with him, you're going to be marginalized. Nobody wants to go through that, not even in some rhetorical way. So that is why Assange is in prison, why he's been silenced. Have you noticed these stories about Alexei Navalny in Russia? And we're told that Putin is mean to him. He's got internet. He's tweeting. Julian Assange can barely even have visits from his family. And he's been demonized, as we're told. He's the reason Trump was president. That's a whole other fraud, which is not true. He did not, Russians didn't hack. WikiLeaks, somebody at the DNC leaked those emails to him. That's a bigger story, and I'll have to come back again, I guess.
Yes.
So
I don't know what happened that day, but the whole thing about him being responsible for Hillary, and not like he gave her a map of the United States and excluded Wisconsin and Michigan in the map for her campaign. That's his doing, not hers, right?
No, nothing is her fault. And all these, Russian Facebook memes was about $50,000. And meanwhile, the corporate media gave Trump several $1 billion in free ads. The Republicans came in at the last minute with money for him. None of those things helped Trump win. It's just WikiLeaks and some Russian Facebook memes.
That's the reason why liberals, particularly in the Congressional Black Caucus, I can't get anyone to the event I did something the other night in DC, and I couldn't get anyone from the Congressional Black Caucus down there, or the progressive.
Of course not. Of course, because they're not really progressive, and they're not going to stand against their party establishment. And because they're going to be beaten down if they do. So regardless of how they really feel, they are not going to stand up. These are not people who, assuming they care at all, these are not people who are going to take the risk of standing up. That's not going to happen.
Tough risk. So we've been talking to Margaret Kimberly. We do have just a few minutes left. If you'd like to wrap it up, you're going to be there this Sunday. I hope you're looking forward to it.
I am. I can't wait. I like to speak up on behalf of Julian Assange at every opportunity. And I hope, it'll be almost the end of October, but be on the lookout, Black Alliance for Peace, the International Month of Action Against AFRICOM. We have to close these military bases, end these and Democrats, by the way, one of the things they do is vote for these military budgets, $750 billion, 60% of all discretionary spending. So I'm also very proud to be on the board of the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation, in addition to the other things we discussed. So all of these things are important in talking about Assange, because he revealed, and this is why they have beaten down on him so badly, he revealed U.S. war crimes. He is a political prisoner. He should be seen as such. Most 90% of what you're told about him is a lie. He is not a rapist. He is not a hacker. He is none of those things. And they hate him because he revealed the truths that they want to keep hidden. And we must always support him.
Yes, and he wasn't even charged for.
No, he was not. But that's how they keep people from supporting him, because there are people who, when we're in sync politically, and they'll say, "But what about the rape charge? Wasn't he a rapist?" And I'm like,
he was never charged with it.
He was not. And the only reason Sweden didn't drop the case was that the U.S. was pressuring them not to do so.
Yes, and the Crown Prosecutor Services. There's a couple of interviews we've had with someone who revealed that, Stefani Morizzi. This has been, it's gone by too quickly. I got so much stuff to ask you. I never got to my notes, but we'll have you back so we can talk about your great book. And it's a great title. It's called Prejudicial, not Presidential. Margaret Kimberly, thank you very much we'll see you Sunday night here at the Theater 80 St. Mark's. I'm Randy Credico live on the fly. This is an Assange Countdown to Freedom episode, I believe. We'll see you next Monday, folks, on the 25th. Bye-bye. And Paul Robeson, we're going out with John Brown's Body by Paul Robeson. Bye-bye.
Peace out.
Right.
A mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. The stars above in heaven now are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven now are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven now are looking kindly down on the grave of old John Brown. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on.